The first thing I learned in art school is that in art there are no rules. This is the very essence of art. The moment there are rules in art, it is no longer art. So art should have zero rules by definition. The only rules in art should be rules that are self-imposed by the artists themselves.
Well, hey everyone. Welcome to episode 403 of F-Stop, Collaborate, and Listen with your host, Matt Payne. This week's guest, Marsel van Oosten, has won countless awards for his incredible photography and is probably most well known for his groundbreaking photographs of snow monkeys and the golden snub-nosed monkey. In addition to his incredible wildlife photography, Marcel's landscape photography is incredibly inspiring and quite unique, a true feast for the eyes. This week, Marcel shares his journey from a career in advertising becoming a renowned wildlife photographer. He discusses the influence of his graphic design background on his photography, the impact of artificial intelligence on the art form, and the importance of human connection in photography. Our conversation delves into the ethical implications of AI in art and how it may change the landscape of photography, while also emphasizing the irreplaceable value of real-life experiences in capturing moments. You're gonna love it. Okay, let's get to this week's episode with Marsel van Oosten. All right, Marsel van Oosten, it's great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me.
You are so very welcome. I've had a few conversations about you over the years with some of my business partners for the Natural Landscape Photography Awards, including Tim Parkin, which he judges the Wildlife Photographer of the Year competition as well. And he had some interesting stories about some of your winning images from the past, which I know we're going to talk about later on in the podcast. But, you know, I've been an admirer of your photography for a long time. And so it's great to finally have you here on the show.
Happy to be here.
Oh. Awesome. Well, we've got a lot of incredibly controversial subjects that we're going to cover today. But first, let's just have you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay, so my name is Marsel van Oosten. That's how you pronounce it. And I'm originally from the Netherlands. I was born in Rotterdam. So I lived most of my life, worked in advertising for a very long time, switched to photography, and eventually ended up living in South Africa here with my wife, Daniela. And this is our base. And from here, we host photographic safaris all over the planet.
Amazing. And how long have you been doing photography?
I'm not 100% sure when it started, but it started obviously like with most people, like as a thing you do when you go on holiday, you know? So I was the same, and then at some stage I decided to go to art school. So I went to the Royal Academy of the Arts in Rotterdam to study graphic design. And one of the courses I could do was photography, actually. And I had zero interest in photography back then. It was like at the bottom of my list. So I spent zero time in art school on photography. And instead, I got a degree in graphic design and in art direction. And then I became an art director in advertising. And I did that for 15 years. And as an art director, you have to come up with the creative ideas for the ad campaigns that you develop. And being an art director, you're then responsible for the visual part of the campaigns. So then suddenly I had to choose and select photographers who were going to photograph my campaigns. So that's when I had to become really serious about photography, because I had to learn to understand how it all works. And that's when I started to work very closely together with a lot of different photographers in all different kind of fields, from like car photography to lingerie photography to people photography, etc. And that's how I learned about photography, and that's also how I started to appreciate photography for the very first time. And that's when it became a hobby and etc.
So you've got a background in graphic design, pretty strong influence there. I'd be curious to hear you talk about how that education and background in graphic design has informed the way you think about photography, the way you think about art, and the intersections of kind of how you think about what photography should be as an art form.
Okay, so it's like three different answers basically. So regarding the graphic design, I think the graphic design is just fits my character, just how I am. I like things to be super organized and like designed. I also like to be creative. I like to create order in chaos. These are things I really enjoy, and so graphic design is all about that. You know, you have like all these visual elements, and you have to try to make it look nice and it makes sense. So that's the graphic design part, which I obviously learned in art school. But then also in art school, I learned about art direction and advertising. And that taught me something entirely different. That taught me how to think conceptually and how to start with an idea and then analyze the idea and then turn it into a message and then try to present that message in a super concise, very original way so that people will notice it first and understand it easily. So those two things combined, the graphic design, so the aesthetics part of it, that is just part of who I am, and the art direction part is just something that I've learned throughout my career to do, and I think that background has really, really helped me a lot with what I do.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I would imagine that having that background would give you a tremendous advantage when it came to composition and also with editing, which is, I think, something that a lot of people struggle with in photography. So you've got a lot of really powerful things going in your favor from the graphic design background.
When I started I think my first advertising job was in 92, I think. And then already we worked with Photoshop, and that was Photoshop 1. So that's the first time we started like working on images, and obviously back then it was super old school. But yeah, the fact that I already started working with basically image manipulation back then, that was a great advantage.
Yeah, especially when you think about a lot of, I'm thinking late 80s, early 90s, mid 90s, when the advent of digital photography came around, a lot of the traditional film photographers became really overwhelmed by the idea of using software to enhance their images. And then I think a lot of people ended up just quitting because they, for either ethical reasons or they just couldn't figure it out or they didn't want to learn the new software, whatever their reason was. But it seems like if you have that background of graphic design and image manipulation, you're going to have a tremendous advantage over people who are afraid of that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, at least back then. I mean, nowadays, obviously, the playing field is very level, with like basically everyone having some sort of skill in that respect.
Right. Well, let's get to the heart of this thing. You sent over some really juicy topics, and I think this is going to be
You're not going to blame it all on me.
No.
Okay, good.
These are all things I'm very interested in as well, and I'm always interested in hearing other people's perspectives. So let's start off with artificial intelligence. I know that's something that a lot of photographers right now are talking about, thinking about, worried about, and I think how it's impacting photography now and into the future is something that a lot of people are, putting a lot of energy into. We've talked about it a lot on this podcast before, but I wanted to get your take on where we're currently at. So tell us what your thoughts are on the current state of photography and artificial intelligence.
Well, let me start by saying I'm just super fascinated by AI just in general. I'm really obsessed about it because I can see just the incredible potential, both positive and negative, and I think truly a revolution that we're in the midst of, and it's going to just change our lives so dramatically. So that's just the first thing for the photography. It's very fascinating to talk about the ethics, about where it's going. It's hard to predict, obviously, what's really going to happen, but we can already see what's happening, which is that it's getting better and better very fast. And it's only going to get faster and faster and faster. So it's going to learn more. And it's going to be like within 2 years, we will no longer be able to distinguish a normal photograph from something that was generated by a computer. I'm 100% certain of that. Now, people who are like real pros, I can usually tell it pretty quickly. But it's only because it still has certain limitations, but those limitations will disappear very, very quickly. Next year we will no longer see photographs with people with 6 fingers. You know those are just like little glitches that will all disappear. So we'll very quickly end up in a situation where it is indistinguishable. You see a photograph and you don't know what you're looking at. Basically you see an image and you don't know whether it's a photograph or whether it's something that's being generated by AI. And already now, even though it is still quite limited in what it can do, it's still far from perfect. The vast majority of people on social media are not even able to distinguish a photograph from an AI-generated image. Now, the internet is already inundated with images that are not photographs, but just created.
It's frustrating.
Well, we could talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, every once in a while, I don't know how active you are on Facebook, but I have like my personal page and my business page, and every once in a while, like I'll log into my business page and you see your feed, and I follow like 10 pages or something, so they have to fill it with something, and it's like full of AI imagery from all these fake bot accounts, I'm guessing from other countries that are just trying to monetize Facebook bonuses. But yeah, I mean, it's amazing to see how much traction those images get, how much airtime they're getting from the general public. And I don't know about you, but I've also noticed like a significant decrease in the views of my images. So the impact is real, you know? So
yeah, the impact is real, and it's totally rational and understandable that is about that. Well, that is the result that's going to happen, because as a photographer, we have to spend all this time searching for perfect locations and for the perfect time to photograph it with the right light. And there's so many variables that we have zero control over, etc. So if we create a photograph, then very often a professional photographer will look at its own work and say like, well, I know that the potential was like here. I got it up to I got this close, which is pretty good. I got like 80%, so I'm happy with that. And especially with wildlife photography that I do, it's 80% is already like, oh, that's like super high. But with AI, obviously, the variables are gone, because you create the variables yourself, and you have full control. So that means that the output is always going to be something that is like extremely close to what you wanted in the first place. And it's going to look indistinguishable from a real photograph. So you're going to have something that is probably very pretty to look at. It will look real, So people will feel that it's real, but it won't be, and it will get us in a lot of trouble, because a lot of people will say, "Oh, well, really, what's the point?" Some trips I spend like $20,000 to go to some place that is almost impossible to go to, and travel there and to take photographs. And then it's a lot of hard work, and then I come back, and then I get maybe 5 images that I'm happy with. And what's the point of doing that for someone who doesn't have the means to spend that kind of money, who doesn't have the time to do that, maybe even doesn't really like to be uncomfortable going to like countries where it's boiling hot or super dusty. So suddenly you're going to get like millions of people who now can create their own images. And this is similar to when suddenly everybody had their camera in their phone. Then we were also very worried, because before it was only the photographers who had the real equipment and they were taking the photographs. And now suddenly like everyone had a camera. And that was, people felt threatened by that already, because there was suddenly so much competition. And this is just like next level.
Yeah, I know you teach workshops, and I teach workshops as well. And I think a lot of people go into workshops because they want to get that photograph, right? Like they see the photographs that you've taken. They're like, I want something like that too. But what I always find is that by the end of the workshop, people are more moved by the experience that they have, right? They like, oh my God, I just saw a penguin jump into the water off of an iceberg, right? Like witnessing that, capturing that moment, or even trying to capture that moment. Like AI can't replace experiences, and it can't replace the feeling that you get by actually being there and feeling the things that you feel when you see the power of nature in person. So I think there's always going to be a place for photography in that regard. But I do think that for people who are purely motivated by the end result of getting that image, I think those people are probably going to give up, which I'm fine with that, honestly.
Yeah, you're gonna basically end up with 2 groups that already exist, but you're gonna have people who create images just as an art form, and then you have the people who go for the experience. And the photography is part of the experience, like you just explained. So I'm not worried about my livelihood and my job, because I literally sell experiences.
Right. Exactly.
I take people to places where few people have ever been. So AI can never replace that. But
at least not yet.
No, not yet. No, but like it's easy to give examples. Like I just a couple of months ago, I was on a scouting tour in Algeria, which is not a very popular place to go for most people. It's like totally not. And so I spent a lot of time there scouting and discovered a lot of like very photogenic places that are like truly amazing. And I'm going to share those experiences with people who travel with us. But the images that I share of that trip will result in other people making images that will resemble those kind of locations, because they're attracted to how it looks like, and it looks different, and then they actually can. So it will be bad for image sales, for instance. So if I was totally dependent on selling images, obviously that would be bad, because suddenly everybody can just say like, okay, I take that image and I'm gonna let AI create 500 different versions of it, and then I have a body of work that looks similar to what Marcel shot.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely problematic from that point of view. And I still feel like if you were to take 20 people and show them how to create an image in AI, and then take them to a location where you could create those images through photography, I think 20 out of 20 people are going to have more enjoyment. Maybe 19 out of 20 19 out of 20 people are going to have more enjoyment out of the process of like figuring out how to capture that image with a camera and like all the things that went into doing that. I think they're going to have a much better experience, a much better time than than they did when they were doing it through AI. I also think they're going to have more pride in what they've created. So I don't think it's all bad, but I think it's an interesting crossroads that we find ourselves in.
I think it's just different characters. You know, some people like experience, like traveling and like adventure, but there's tons of people who do not like to travel and who do not like to go on adventures, but they do like to create like art. So for those people, like an entire box of opportunities has just opened up, because now they can very easily like create things that they would otherwise never have been able to. So in that sense, I mean, for those people and for the development of like art in general, I think it's really good, because it's gonna open up so many opportunities, and the sky is going to be the limit, and people are going to go so creative, I think, with AI. But for photography, it will be bad, because photography will, I think, especially certain genres of photography will just slowly die off, because there's a whole new younger generation now that already has the attention span of like a prawn. So all they can do is like scroll through TikTok, and they can't watch like a video longer than 5 seconds. But those people, because of their short attention span and because social media is like one big popularity contest anyway, those people will be, I think, very tempted to go and use AI to create all kinds of things that look super spectacular. And I will never be able to compete with a photograph that I shot last month in Amboseli of like a herd of elephants crossing a lake bed, with someone who does exactly the same in AI, but then in their version, the tusks are all like twice as long, and and the weather conditions are perfect. So real photography is gonna like always look like almost like a sketch, that people used for the eventual art that is going to be the AI.
If you are new to this podcast, you'll quickly learn that we are listener supported on Patreon. I depend on our listeners to keep the show going. If you find value in what we are doing here, please take a moment to support us on Patreon. While everyone's budget and situation is different, if you are getting any value out of listening to the show, I think anything more than $0 is fair. If you can't support us on Patreon, you can always help out by leaving a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify. Please take this moment to hit pause and support the show. I'd really appreciate it. It's easy. Just go to patreon.com/fstopandlisten or find a link in the show notes. Cheers. Okay, let's get back to my chat with Marsel van Oosten. I feel like there's one more piece of this equation though that we should talk about that I think is missing when it comes to people connecting with your photography. They're connecting not just with the image, but also with the person who captured the photograph, right? Like all of what makes Marcel, or what makes Matt. People want connections with other humans, not necessarily with computers and machines and algorithms. And I think once it's revealed that these concoctions are made by machines, I think all that connection, that human connection, is lost by the viewer. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
I think that is a very romantic idea that you have. I think it's not very likely. You know the graffiti artist Banksy?
Yeah.
No one has ever met him. No one has ever seen him. Nobody knows what he is. Does he? I mean,
is that a real person?
We don't know. I'm sure he's a real person, but like there's zero connection to him because there's no interviews, there's nothing. It's just It's just art that seemingly randomly just appears in cities, on walls, and people like it because they like the ideas. And so there's always a very strong idea behind his art. And it's the ideas that people connect to, but not the artist. The people don't care about the artist. It's sort of like it's mysterious, but they don't care.
Maybe I'm an anomaly because, I have a lot of my favorite artists and photographers might not necessarily have the best photography in the world. Like there's people who make better work, but all that's wrapped up in what makes them a person and their personality and like their ethics and everything that's wrapped up in who that person is. Like to me, that elevates their art in my mind. But I know that maybe I'm just a weirdo. So
no, but it's totally understandable. I understand why you feel that way, and obviously I have the same. I mean, I know so many photographers, and a lot of them are good friends, and so. I'm always happy when I see that they made new work because, I know that person. And when I see their work, usually I can see, that's really him or it's really her. Because, you've come to learn a person over time. But that's not to say that another artist who does not use a camera but uses only AI is not going to be a nice person. That person can also be like super nice and be friends with you. And they also create art and it looks indistinguishable from photography, but it's completely differently made. And what I would like to add to that is that where this will lead to is better ideas. So there's going to be so much is going to be produced with AI because it's going to be so accessible and it's going to be so fast. But in the end, it's all about the input. So a human has to tell the AI what the AI should create. So that means that at the very basis of the whole artistic process is still the human brain, where it all happens. So it will always start with a good idea. So it still means that only the people with the good ideas, the people who are creative thinkers, those will be the people who will stand out with their AI because they will be the people who create good ideas. And good ideas people will notice. And all the rest will just become like postcards and things that people have seen a million times before because it has always been like that. Creating something original is super hard. Copying something is super easy. And that's why if you scroll through your Instagram feed, you see a lot of stuff that looks like a lot of other stuff. And that's because people copy or get inspired. And then because they don't have original ideas, they create something that's more or less already out there. That is my positive view.
No, that's fair. People with the best ideas are always going to win. I'd be curious, at the very start of this, you had mentioned that thinking about and talking about the ethical implications of AI is something that fascinates you. And as you were talking, I was reminded by the fact that these AI learning models are all based on existing imagery that we've created as photographers, right? Like, so at the very least, people who are using AI to create images and call it their own art are essentially borrowing and or stealing from people who have already created something before them and potentially knowing that it's going to have a negative impact on that person's livelihood or whatever. So I'd be curious to hear you talk a little bit more about your thoughts on, like, are people who use AI to create images, like, is that an ethical boundary that people are crossing?
Yeah, so that's also a very logical question, and I understand the concern. And partly I share the concern because obviously I am going to be affected by this as well, like I just explained. I think that this is just the next step. So like the moment Google was introduced, it was not, that was not very different. Google was also like just crawling the entire internet looking for images, and it was like collecting all those images, and you could suddenly search for images, and that's what a lot of photographers do. They want to go to this country, they type it in Google, and they search for Google images. They get a lot of images, and then they look at the ones that they really like. They make a little folder on their hard drive, and then they put all the images in there of those locations that they really enjoy. There will be a lot of photographs in there taken by other photographers of those same locations that they also really like. And they're going to use all those images made by other people to feed their own inspiration. And we consider this normal. And this has been happening for decades now. And so I think in a way, AI is not very different. AI is just going to be smarter, and it's going to be hyper fast. And AI is just learning from everything that's on the internet. And it's just analyzing, and it looks at a gazillion images. And I don't see a lot of difference there, actually. So, and I'm saying that from perspective
that's fair.
where that's gonna impact. It's gonna impact me, and I know it's gonna impact me in a negative way. But art has always been about inspiration, and it will still be about inspiration. But the way that we're going to be inspired now is just going to be different. It's another level. We've been through quite a few levels already, and this is just, the next one.
Yeah. Well, just for the record, personally don't have a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? Like if your approach to photography is to go on the internet and find locations that other people have already photographed and then go to those locations and photograph them in the exact same way, that's really not being creative or novel, or like, I mean, it might be fun, like whatever, but like that doesn't make you an artist. That's all I'm going to say about that.
No, I fully agree with that. But that's also what distinguishes the professional photographers who are successful with what they do, and the vast majority of people who are just creating their version of art. But obviously art is extremely subjective. There is no rules for what is art and what is not. So for some people, it's if you don't have a super creative mind, you don't come up with original ideas. But if you still want to be doing something creatively, and you like being outdoors, and you like taking photographs, then I think it's a very logical step to just see what other people have done, and then you see something that you really like, and you think, I'm going to go to this place, I'm going to try to photograph something like that.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between photographing something like that or trying similar techniques versus like completely replicating an exact composition, that kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I've actually had that happen where, like once, like literally, someone.
Yeah, I've had it a few times.
Yeah, but like almost to the inch. But not one image, but an entire series. So that's flattering. Well, it is in a way, probably, but it was just like, that's super surreal that happened. But yeah, so that's obviously the next level of copying, and that is often people who just are looking for like recognition and for like a pat on the shoulder and more followers, and this is what I said earlier about like social media just in general, because it's a popularity contest. Everybody wants followers and comments and likes. So yeah, you scroll through your feed and you see images that are super popular. You see this image has like 100,000 likes. Wow. So and then you see another image that has 100,000 likes, and then you think like, I see what's going on here. They're doing this and they're doing that and they're doing low contrast, and they're making the night sky with the Milky Way look blue and purple, which it never is. But it's very popular, so let me try that, and then that's how people just gradually move consciously, sometimes into certain styles, and very often also subconsciously. If you're constantly bombarded every day with all kinds of images, and a lot of the popular images have a certain style element to them, you are going to be affected by that whether you want it or not. And at some stage, you might find yourself editing your images and thinking like, hey, I'm almost now trying that thing that I always hated so much.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've done that before. I get that. Some of what I'm saying here is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but, to the whole popularity contest thing and likes and followers and all that. And I think this is just more of a statement about values, and maybe this is also shooting myself in the foot from a financial perspective, but I'd rather have 10,000 followers who appreciate my work because it's original and unique and interesting versus having 100,000 followers but being known as somebody who just copies whatever people have already done. You know what I mean? So that's me, though. Those are my values.
No, that's not just you. That's also me. I feel exactly the same. I'm not a big fan of social media anyway. I've had periods where I've been like offline for months in a row because then I just don't care. And then sometimes I'm back. And I see the good sides. I see a lot of the bad things. But in general, I think it's good, and I think it's been really good for art in general. And we tend to focus on the bad stuff because there's so much of it. But it has also opened up so many new possibilities for so many people, and there's so much great art that is being made, not just photography, but just in general. So that's what I'm positive about.
Totally agree. And I didn't mean to sound super negative on it. It's just something that has always frustrated me about what the internet likes. People love copycat stuff that's already been done before versus the new stuff for whatever reason. I don't totally get that, but that's me.
Yeah, but it's totally normal. Like I said, I'm exactly the same. I couldn't care less what people think of what I do. I just do what I like. I go to places that I really like to go to. I photograph only subjects that excite me. I totally ignore subjects that I know would be very popular, but I'm just not inspired by it. So I just draw my own plan. And that's how I do things. But there's also photographers who just, look at the market, they look at what is popular, and then they create that kind of content. And they're obviously going to be a lot more popular.
Yeah, I guess if that's your intent, then that makes total sense. And if you're in a phase of your photography where you're learning and like you want to go to those locations because it's helping you learn and understand, and you want to use other people's photos as reference for the learning process, I think that's cool. But I think if you're leveraging other people's original ideas to become more popular yourself, I personally find that a little bit disingenuous and kind of unethical from my perspective. But that's me.
Yeah, it's a thin line between like inspiration and copying.
Right,
100%. For the one person, they think they're just being inspired while they're actually copying. And, some people are just copying even though they know they're copying. And
right.
But this also has never been different at any time in human history.
True.
And that will never change. And And the same applies to AI. So many things are changing. I always like to give the example of the painting before photography, when there was no machine to make like basically a literal copy of reality. All we had was paint, and there were the painters, and the painters, they painted reality, and we always thought that's what we had, and no one ever said to those painters like, yeah, it's a nice painting, but I bet that woman didn't look that good, or I bet that the light on that mountain wasn't like really that gorgeous. People just didn't expect to see literal copies of reality because the technology was not there. All the discussions that we're having now is only because of photography. It's only because we have that box that can create a literal copy of reality that a lot of people expect us to use it in exactly that way, especially if you're working in certain genres of photography.
Well, man, what a segue for our next subject, because I know you wanted to talk about manipulation and ethics, and I'm going to quote you here. You said that you wanted to discuss image manipulation and the ethics Taliban, which I suppose, interestingly enough, I kind of put myself squarely right in the middle of that movement as someone who really values authenticity in photography, which I think there's a lot of nuance in that. Like you, I think when we present things that are not created honestly forward as representing truth, similarly to the way AI does, it can have negative ramifications. And I know that you're a huge proponent for kind of anything goes in photography. So I'd like to hear your take on ethics and image manipulation.
Yeah. So for me, I make a very clear distinction between two kinds of photography. So the one kind of photography should be as close to reality as possible. So for instance, news photography for forensic evidence, scientific photography for educational purposes. Those kinds of photography, they need to be like 100%, if at all possible, close to reality, because we need to be able to trust it. Otherwise, things get very, very murky very, very quickly. There have been incidents in the past with war photographers who, they see the scene and they see, oh, there's a little doll lying there. The image would look so much more dramatic if I just pick up that doll and I put it right here in the foreground, And so within news photography, obviously that's a no-go, because then you're intervening. You are now changing reality. You're making it look like something happened that never happened. So that's a no-go. The second group of photography is art. And the first thing I learned in art school is that in art there are no rules. This is the very essence of art. The moment there are rules in art, it is no longer art. So art should have zero rules by definition. The only rules in art should be rules that are self-imposed by the artists themselves. So you create your own ethics and you say, these are the rules that I've created for myself, and this is the framework within. That is how I think it should be. Then what you were already touching was honesty in photography. So whether you have to be honest about what you're creating. So I have to be very nuanced about what I'm going to say now, because things can very easily be applied to me, but they shouldn't. So I think there's zero rules in art. I think that every photographer has the right to do whatever the hell they please to create the art that they want, as long as it does not harm any humans or animals.
And just as a caveat, I totally agree with what you just said.
Okay, that's good. Because the next thing is, even though I think that every photographer has that right to ignore whatever rule there supposedly is, I do not work like that myself. So I like my images to be very natural looking, very realistic looking. I like them to feel like very close to like real nature. I don't want them to look like very processed. So I have actually set up quite a lot of rules, and within those rules I navigate and try to create the art that I want. But I know many photographers whom I also greatly respect, who have no issues whatsoever with doing all kinds of stuff. And then the obvious question is like, okay, as an artist now, do I have the responsibility as an artist to tell my audience that what I'm presenting them is either real or not real, or something in between?
Mm-hmm.
So I personally think that the artist has zero responsibility in that sense. I think it should be the choice of the artist to decide whether they want to disclose how they have created their art. I can give an example. Do you know the television series Fargo?
Yeah.
Okay. Fargo starts with a disclaimer. The disclaimer says something like that everything that you're about to see is based on true events, which is a blatant lie. This is absolutely untrue. This is a lie, but they put it there deliberately because it is part of their idea. It is part of their art. They think that by feeding people that line, people will look at the series through different eyes than if they knew it was just all just like fantasy. And they're obviously right about that. And that's why they did that. So I support that. I think that's clever. I think it has a purpose. And so I enjoy that they... I do not respect people who will like say like I was there and I saw this butterfly landing on this nose of the crocodile, and it was really there. That to me feels different, but I will still defend their choice to do that, because in the end it is still art, and in art there are no rules, and I very, very strongly believe in that. So there's me doing this thing that I've set up my own list of rules for, and then there is art in general, where I just love people to go fully overboard, do whatever the hell they want to do, and just create something that surprises me, inspires me, stimulates my brain, makes me happy, makes me angry. I don't care. But that's what art is for creating emotions.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, you haven't said anything that I disagree with yet. Are you familiar? This is an event that happened in late 2022. There was this woman named, I don't even know if this is her real name, but she put herself out there as Kittia Pawlowski. She did this massive publicity stunt where she quote unquote photographed snow leopards like below Mount Everest, and had all of these incredible images that she put out there, and like even had all of this like backstory about traveling to Nepal and Tibet, and like what it was like to trek in there, and like had all of these Instagram stories and all this stuff leading up to this huge publicity stunt where she released these images. I think there was like maybe 6 to 10 images of these snow leopards in the high Himalaya where they don't exist, and like people just ate it up. Like it went viral. People were just like, this is the most amazing photography I've ever seen. And she was presenting it as if it was something that really happened and that she really experienced, like trekking there and capturing these rare images of snow leopards. And anyway, long story short, like people did all this research, and like experts in the area and like wildlife experts on snow leopards, like everyone just started chiming in like, this is not possible. And like people started piecing together how the images were composited, and then Petapixel called her out on it, and like she denied it and basically said, this really happened, I was there, how dare you. And then eventually, like after even more stuff came up, she admitted it, and then basically everything kind of came crashing down on her. But like, what are your thoughts on something like that, where it's like this huge publicity stunt to get fame and fortune that's really just based on like this huge body of lies that is meant to deceive people for personal gain?
Yeah, that's obviously pretty pathetic. Now that you mentioned it, I actually remember the whole thing. I remember reading about it and how people were analyzing everything, and it's super fascinating because it turned into like almost like a Bellingcat operation where you had all these investigators from all over the planet all trying to like see, is this real or is it not real? Yeah, probably, yeah, very pathetic. I don't obviously know the backstory of this particular woman. I don't know her reasoning behind it. I don't know whether she just thought it would never blow up the way it did. And, very complicated. But again, like this is just a case of deception. And deception is as old as mankind. The deception is all around us all the time. We are being deceived constantly. I've worked in advertising for 15 years. I've done quite a lot of deceiving myself, trying to present a product in a way that makes it look way nicer than it actually is. And that is, it is also a way of deceiving. And even within the field of photography, we are constantly being deceived, but we accept it because we've gotten used to it. Nude photography, for instance, like all the nude photography as from the early days to now, and like very, very heavily retouched, and none of those models actually look like that. But Petapixel is not going to write a story about that because nobody cares, because it has never been different. This is just like always. So it is only the stories that sound a little bit more exotic that that float to the surface. But other than that, I think it's not really that special because like I said, deception is all around us, and people are just in general prone to being deceptive, I think. Yeah.
Well, and I know this topic is particularly sensitive to you because you work a lot in the wildlife space, and I think in the wildlife photography world, things are especially dogmatic and rigid when it comes to image manipulation. And I'm not personally here to say whether that's right or wrong, but I think people that look at wildlife imagery typically expect that what they're seeing represents a genuine moment that photographer witnessed and captured. Why do you think wildlife competitions should loosen their dogmatic grip?
So I think there's definitely value in the fact that people know that they can trust that what they're looking at is actually something that really happened. That this has always been at the core of magazines like National Geographic. They have always been like extremely dogmatic in regards to image manipulation because they wanted to be trusted by everyone. Nobody should ever have to question whether an image in National Geographic was either manipulated or maybe it never occurred. So I fully understand that. There is a lot of competitions, photography competitions, who have adopted that whole way of looking at photography. They also want to be able to show and share images that people know are real and really happened. And again, I respect that because there is also a gazillion other competitions who couldn't care less. So there's a bit of both. What I myself have problems with is that there is, especially in my line of work as a wildlife photographer, the landscape people are a lot more open-minded with regards to image processing. The wildlife photography community is very, very conservative. It is fine, but it's all based on the notion of truth that, it has to be like real. It has to depict reality. That in itself is already something you can never achieve with photography, because
Agreed.
it's just not. It is not the right medium for that. If you want to attempt to show reality, then you should use at least video. That would be much better. And then put on a super wide angle lens so that you cannot frame anything out. And then use a microphone, obviously, and then people will be able to trust what you're seeing. But photography by its very nature is already very deceptive, because we're making so many choices, and especially the choices about what am I not going to show my audience. And
Right.
I can take a photograph of a beautiful tree, it's a beautiful willow tree, and it will look awesome as fine art. But people will not know that my framing just put the thermonuclear reactor just outside of the frame, So the reality is
Right.
actually it is literally the opposite of what I photographed. And so the funny thing then is that photograph would not be disqualified at all, because people would just see it as like, well, yeah, no, that tree was really there. But the story that I tell with that photograph is a blatant lie. It's extremely deceptive with regards to that particular location. And at the same time, if I remove a tiny little twig from my image, or like the only white pebble on a black beach, that would get my image disqualified. And so my argument is that if you compare those two scenarios, the scenario where I'm removing a twig because I find it distracting, that twig adds nothing to my story at all. The version with the twig and without the twig are essentially the same. That will be disqualified, but the other one is really the big lie. So that's where I have big problems. And add to that all the techniques that we're using, like, a lot of wildlife photographers are using lenses that go far beyond 400 millimeter. If I take a photograph of a rhino with a 600 millimeter lens, my foreground's going to be very out of focus. The rhino's going to be sharp, at least part of it, and then the background's also going to be out of focus again. I have 3 different layers of focus, which is impossible. We cannot see this with our own eyes.
Right,
We
that's
have
not
only
reality.
we have 2 planes. Either the foreground is in focus, the background is not, or it's your reverse. We don't have 3 different ones. And yet, no problem whatsoever. Go right ahead. I can choose to photograph my running impalas with a shutter speed of half a second and create a ton of motion blur, and it will look very artistic. But obviously, it didn't look like that. This is something I did. It's trickery with the camera. It is a lie. It didn't look like this at all. So that's where my problems lie. And so I don't want those competitions to say anything goes, because I think there's already too many of those. But I think they should be more lenient, and they should look like, okay, what did this photographer do in this image? So this photographer clearly didn't like this extreme little highlight in the background that is totally taking the whole image out of balance, etc. So he just decided to use generative fill or whatever to remove that highlight. it doesn't change that image one bit in terms of the truth behind it.
Sure.
But it does make it a better picture, and in the end, that's, I think, what it's mostly about. It's about the art. So I think they should be more lenient with those kind of things. So not like total composites and do whatever you want and like your snow leopard story, but just like more sensible.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are going to be surprised when they hear me say this, that I completely agree with you. I mean, my own personal approach to my photography is I'm never going to add stuff that wasn't there. Like, I'm not going to put in a different cloud or sky or put the Milky Way over a part of the scene where the Milky Way could never appear, or take flowers from Colorado and paint them into a scene from Oregon, or vice versa, or whatever. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I'm going to get rid of some minor distractions here and there that make the photograph flow better, or composition looks better. And I think, I'm not altering the actual experience that I had through the camera or suggesting that this is something that was actually there when it wasn't. And I think there's I think most people, not all, but most people can rationally see the difference between like cleaning a photograph up versus like creating something from nothing. I think those are two completely different approaches to creating a photograph.
Sure.
And one represents what the photographer actually witnessed or experienced to some degree or another. And one is a complete creation from that person's imagination. And they both have validity, but they're not the same thing, so.
No, they're not, definitely not the same thing. And it's, and that's what makes art so interesting, that it's like 100% subjective. And, both from the artist's point of view as from the audience point of view.
Yeah. Wow. I thought we were going to like argue and disagree and all kinds of stuff, but it seems like we're like pretty much on the same page. That's funny. Well, one of the things you had mentioned to me in our correspondence that we probably should pay closer attention to in terms of this particular subject is kind of scrutinizing video on a deeper level. And I'd be curious if you had some examples of where video is used in a deceptive way that people might not be aware of.
Yeah, so that fits perfectly to what we just talked about, because there is definitely different rules for photography and for video. So in photography, people tend to get very upset if things are changed, but in video, like totally not. So in video, obviously, you're working with a lot of material, a lot of footage, and it moves. But the thing with video is that there has to be a story, always. There has to be a storyline, and it has to be an interesting storyline, and it has to constantly capture the people's attention, and it has to lead somewhere, and ideally it has to be drama. So that makes it a lot harder than just being a fine art photographer and taking that one shot at the perfect time of the day, and then you have it. But in order to create interesting stories, that is difficult. And then you have to shoot a lot of material, and all that material has to be not only nice looking, it also has to make sense, because you have to be able to edit it. And very often, especially in my line of work as a wildlife photographer, I see so many like wildlife documentaries and movies, up to like the biggest of the biggest names in the world, where you can just see that sequences have been created that look like they really happened, but they didn't. Not in the way that they present the story. So this especially usually has to do with interaction between subjects, in this case species. So we see a lion walking, and then the next shot is we see an impala suddenly look up. And because of how they cut these two images and how they edit it, the story is, this impala gets spooked by this lion that is walking there. And this is a totally normal way to edit, because everybody does it like that. But very often those two scenes didn't actually occur. like at the same moment, and sometimes not even at the same in the same locations. And
Right.
there's been tons of evidence where where they're trying to make you feel like you're following this, these two little lion cubs, and then suddenly, there's this whole sequence where there is supposedly one of those two lion cubs, and then people actually see like, wait a minute, no, that's actually another lion cub. It's from another pride, and so this is also this is lying. This is big scale deception actually, because it's a documentary. So this is not like you're going to a Star Wars movie. You expect trickery, but if you go to see like Planet Earth or whatever, like you expect to get the National Geographic kind of experience where you're watching something that actually really happened in the way that it's being presented to you. And that's just very often not the case. And this is not image manipulation, because the footage is probably like real, and nothing has been done to it. But it's just the way that it's put together. If I were a lawyer and I would use this technique in a court of law, that would be really bad, because I would suddenly be suggesting that you see this guy here and you see that and you see that, and people will draw all these kind of connections because people are very good at connecting dots. Even if those dots are completely random. So that I think is very unfair compared to what photographers are constantly dealing with and what people can do in video and totally get away with it.
Well, and to your point, I feel like we should hold those documentaries to a higher standard. And oddly, until you brought it up, I never really questioned it. It's like, oh yeah, of course that's how it went down and blah, 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 blah. But I can also totally see like, yeah, it's probably all just spliced together and, bits here and bits there. And like, they're just telling a narrative and a story using footage from all over the place. And from a logistical perspective, it's like, yeah, that probably makes sense. But also like you're presenting it in a way that makes everyone believe that that's actually how it went down. And sadly, we're seeing like news organizations and political advertising doing the same thing. Like they take little snippets of videos, splicing them together to create a narrative that never actually occurred. You see it all the time with extreme media, Kamala said this and Trump said that. And it's like you took these little sound bites and you put them together and it made it sound like they said those things, but that's not actually the context of what was said. And unfortunately, the general public does not discern that or have any doubts that actually occurred or not, which is interesting.
Yeah, this is a whole other can of worms this is going to be, it's already so bad, and this is going to get so much more worse, where just people will no longer be able to distinguish between what's real video and what is generated. All the quality of deepfakes is already so good, and you can only imagine, like if you were to create some video that is very controversial, and you would release that in a country where people are not used to like social media and computers, etc., a country where there's already a lot of tensions going on, then like a simple edited video that suggests that something really bad happened in their country could spark like a civil war. These things are gonna happen, and this is I don't want to make it too grim, but I think this is going to be the warfare of the future, and it's going to be false information. It's going to be AI. It's going to be hacking. It's going to be causing mass confusion. It's going to be trying to influence people's minds. Yeah, it's a lot less messy than sending rockets.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're already seeing it on social media where there's foreign interferers like Chinese accounts and Russian accounts creating videos and photos that aren't actually what happened, and they're presenting it as if like they're taking footage from something that happened like 20 years ago or 10 years ago in some totally different situation, and they're saying this happened yesterday in this context, and everyone just eats it up, right? Because it's feeding that confirmation bias that we all have. And I think I've heard, I'm not educated enough on this, but I think there's some governments that are trying to push back a little in terms of like deep fakes and like making it unlawful to do some of that stuff. And I fully support that. I mean, let's stop this stuff from happening.
Yeah, but that is going to create a problem in itself, because it is fairly obvious that there will be certain cultures and certain people who will value truth and honesty and freedom. But then there is also a lot of people, and especially regimes, that do not agree with us, or that just have a certain agenda. And while we are trying to tame our AI, they're going to like go full on with their AI.
True.
And they're just they're gonna try to make it the biggest monster they could ever imagine. I think that is why it is so important also for like the civilized world to take that into account, because if you decide to, we're gonna be really careful with AI, but people who want to like remove you from the planet, they might actually going to use it to come up with very clever ideas, and they're going to hack your country, and suddenly nothing works anymore, and that's it.
Yeah. One thing that I thought of while you were talking in regards to image authenticity and AI is I noticed in the last update of Lightroom that Adobe is starting to introduce, I'm going to get this wrong, but it's like basically image attribution. Like you can sign up for an account and like it's tied to your Lightroom, and it gets embedded in the metadata that people can confirm that image actually is something that you are the author of. I think that's an interesting approach to solving some of these issues. I mean, obviously it's more around like copyright issues and things like that, but I wonder if that could help stem some of the AI stuff as well.
It won't. It will just be a very temporary thing, because now that there's so many people worried about this, so many people are like thinking about ways to solve this problem. But it's very soon it will be revealed to us that this will not be solvable, because people are just too smart. So no matter what kind of trick you think of to limit people's possibilities to do something, other people are smarter and they come up with ideas to circumvent that. So I don't think that will happen. I know that now if you look at Instagram on your feed, and you'll see people posting stuff, it will have, if AI was used, you'll see it pops up, it says AI info. That's that little word there. So it means that the creator has used some kind of AI. I think that's completely irrelevant information to add to it, because it doesn't tell you what kind of AI was used. Did that person,
they're not all created equal.
Did that person use the clone tool to get rid of that bright light, or did it just create like 6 polar bears where there was actually only one? We have no way of knowing, but at the same time, there is a certain stigma that comes with a line like that. So I think it's not really helpful. I think it's not really fair to the artist. I think it's also in some ways, I think it's irrelevant. Again, it doesn't really apply to me. I have my own rules. I work in my own way. So people know what they can expect from me. But other than that, I think, yeah, as far as photography goes, I think we're pretty much doomed.
Yeah. All right, Marcel. Last couple of questions. Tell us about your upcoming workshops and your recent book that you've titled Mother.
Our next workshops are only going to be somewhere like late May, June. Yeah, that's going to be more or less safari based. And then we still have some very nice things that we're still going to do. So the things that we have postponed, like I was extremely thrilled about our Algeria tour because it's like hopelessly unique, even though already within 3 months 2 other companies have now copied it. But we're going to areas that are like so super remote that they'll have a very hard time finding where that is. But so that's something that I'm really looking forward to. And then we have a lot of tours that we do quite often just because we like them very much. If there's one thing Daniela and I have decided when we started this business, and that is we only want to do happy things. So the moment we have no joy, whatever it is we're doing, then we're killing that. So over the years we've taken out a lot of tours that were actually financially very good for us, but we didn't enjoy it as much as we should. So then we're very rigorous and then just say okay, done with that. But there's a few that we really like, and one of them will be a combination tour to Zambia and Zimbabwe. They're very close, but they have the most amazing ecosystem there with spectacular forests. Aim is to photograph wildlife in those forests, especially because, and I forgot to mention that at the beginning, but for me, doing both landscape and wildlife is really ideal, because for me, the imagery that excites me the most is actually a combination between the two. So totally. Basically, it's a landscape image that has a wildlife element in it. That's how I would describe it. So that's always what I'm aiming for, which is why the locations where we're going for our wildlife tours are purely driven by my aesthetic preferences for the landscape.
That makes total sense. I mean, I love a good environmental wildlife photo. In fact, I think they have so much more power than just like a typical portrait of wildlife. So I totally understand why you would do that. Talk about your book, Mother.
Yeah, my book, that's really happy with that. It's sold out twice worldwide, so 2 editions. So couldn't expect more. There's a 3rd edition now, so it's available. You can just get it through Amazon or maybe your local bookstore if it's a little bit more high-end one. And Mother is my personal and artistic tribute to Mother Earth, obviously. And it contains my most popular, but also my own favorite images that I've taken over the course of 15 years. So it's really like the tip of the iceberg. It really shows who I am, I think, as an artist. There is a very lengthy interview with me in the beginning where I talk about a lot of stuff that drives me, which could be interesting. And in the back of the book, there's a whole bunch of thumbnails that include not only very interesting captions, but also all my exit details. So that is something that I always very much enjoyed when I started in photography myself. And when I bought those photo books, because I had no clue. And that's how I wanted to learn, how is this made? And so that's why I decided to add all those shooting data in there as well.
No, that's great, because it's more than just a aesthetic tool. It's also a learning tool.
I think, for if you want then I think so. That you can learn a lot because you can literally see what my settings were, what lenses I used.
Well, my last question is, who is someone that you would recommend for this podcast or that our listeners should learn more about?
Yeah, so what I would like you to do, I don't know if he actually likes it, but I think you should ask him. He's a good friend, and he's also a very talented photographer. He does mostly landscape, but also some travel photography, but the majority is all landscape. He's Spanish, but he lives in Australia, and his name is Ignacio Palacios. He's a very funny guy, and he has a very distinctive style. I think he uses a lot of image manipulation in his images, so not in an AI way, but like really. Yeah, there's a lot of manipulation going on, which I think could be very interesting for you to talk about, especially because he is extremely open about it. So he has created quite a few books about his whole workflow, where you can see the original image and then you can see what the end result is, and sometimes that's a really big difference. I think he would be good to talk to.
Perfect. Well, I'm very familiar with Ignacio and his work, so I think that's a great suggestion.
Yeah, sure.
Marcel, this was so fun.
Good. Happy you enjoyed it. I also think it was fun.
Thank you to Marcel for the amazing chat. Be sure to check out our lengthy bonus episode on social media's impact on the current landscape of photography. It's a jammed-packed chat full of great conversation. I know if you enjoyed the main episode, you'll love the bonus episode, which is 20 minutes long. Please support the podcast on Patreon to gain access to this bonus episode, as well as over 230 other bonus episodes. Just go to patreon.com/fstopandlisten to join. Thank you for your support. Cheers. Thanks for stopping in, collaborating with us, and listening. See you next week.